Hi, my dear Astro family. Today I've got a real treat for you. We are going to be speaking about the 12th house with Maurice Fernandez, who is from Africa, I think, originally, but he is in the US at the moment, I think, since 2003. If I recall well, he's an author. He wrote multiple numbers of books. He's an evolutionary astrologer, which, to be frank, I'm not so familiar with. So it's going to be also a little bit of a lecture. We decided to speak about the 12th house because I think 12th house is so misunderstood. There is a lot more power in there than we believe, and we don't always need to be afraid of it. So I've invited an expert who also wrote a book about it to give us a bit of knowledge about the 12th house. Hi, Maurice. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. And it's always a pleasure to explore the 12th house.
It is. And you guys, if you are interested in learning more with me, then I've got all my courses on 50% at the moment till the 15th of March. And I'm going to be starting this aspect class, 13 weeks. It's going to be more than 80 hours, and we're going to be looking at all the planetary combinations possible in so much depth. So if you are interested, check it out below. And if you are interested in Maurice's work, I'm also going to be posting his website in the comment box below. So Maurice, what do you have got to say to us about the 12th house? Because you've got a very interesting intake on it. I remember listening to one of your lectures about it.
Yeah, first of all, it is very misunderstood among astrologers. I think that people tend to look at astrology in a very fragmented way sometimes, where we have bits and pieces and we don't always understand what is the bottom line. So, the 12th house, some people say it's prisons or any kind of addiction, or it's related to spiritual development. So, we can ask how prisons and spiritual development can be in the same space of our zodiac. Well, what stands behind it is that the 12th house represents everything that we cannot control. So in that sense, it's basically an experience between us as individual human beings and the things that happen in our lives that we are not always able to control, which from a philosophical point of view, the 12th house represents all the things that may be fated. So you have free will, and free will gives you the ability to be in control. And you have fate, which are things that happen to you and you cannot always change. Now, one example is, we see the sun rise every morning. It's rising in the 12th house, right? Astronomically. And at the same time, who is there someone pulling a rope to get the sun up and going? No, it's just beyond our control. We are born into this world with this particular mechanism, and we don't even think about it. I mean, you're not thinking every morning, how is the sun rising and what's the speed? And you just wake up, go about your day, and yet there is a force that creates this phenomena of day and night. So that's part of what we experience in the 12th house. There are so many things that happen around us, within us, that are automatic. They, we don't always ask the question where it's coming from. And this is why quite often the 12th house is a house of mystery, is a house of the unconscious, because these are things that happen to us on a very subliminal level. And it takes time for that to filter through our consciousness. So going back to my example, is the 12th house about spirituality, or is the 12th house about prisons? Both are about not being in control. When you're in prison, you're overpowered. Someone decides for you everything, when you're going to eat and what your life's going to be like. And when you are in a spiritual journey, you also understand letting go. Understand that you are not the center of the universe, but part of a larger mechanism. So there is a parallel there.
I tend to call the 12th house as a psychological prison, actually, because if we are not willing to dive a little bit deeper and looking at, where certain things are originated from, yes, we can create those type of prisons, like a cave, or somewhere we should be always escaping because we are afraid of stepping out of our comfort zone. I tend to call all of us are psychologically damaged. And I believe that the 12th house is something to do with some of the hidden treasures. If you discover, then actually you are able to move out of these problems, and then you can blossom, basically. In Hellenistic, we tend to be looking at the 12th house quite a lot as a vocational house, because it is something which might be sextile in your midheaven, but it is very hard to kind of connect to it because it's somehow untouchable, unseenable force.
That's where I don't agree. I agree with your first statement. I think the 12th house is immediately connected to vocation. And that's part of what the book is about. There's a whole section about this. But it's not necessarily because of the 10th house sextile, but it's simply because the whole quadrant, 10, 11, 12, represent global energy, something that is beyond the ego, the self. So both through these three houses give us access to the public. Now, how is that, many people perceive the 12th house as very hidden, as something, like hiding and like maybe you mentioned cave, but in reality, the 12th house, which naturally also I related to the sign of Pisces by archetype. The 12th house represents, as I mentioned, the things we cannot control, but it is also the source of life. Remember that the sun rises in the 12th house every morning. So it's not that dark. It's not that hidden. There's actually a lot of light coming out of there. One mention. The second mention is that because the 12th house represents these larger forces, the forces of creation, the force of the sun and the universe, we as individuals can get lost in that because we are so small, compared to everything that's happening and around us and existing. So there's no individuality in the 12th house. You can't say, I want this and this mine and, my house or my money, because the 12th house represent that which is beyond you. And no one can have ownership of the sun. No one can have ownership of oxygen or rain or whatnot. So these are the forces, the weather, the natural phenomena that are larger than us, but also the spiritual forces. So where are we coming from? We are born in a universe, in a reality that is already made for us. As I said, we did not create the sun, we just see it there. We did not make the trees green and we did not make the sky blue. So there's something larger than us that brought all these components together. What I want to get to is that the 12th house represents our source. I will use another word to explain that. I will call it the cosmic womb. So the cosmic womb, just like a baby in the mother's womb, the cosmic womb is a place where we are passive, where we are nourished without doing anything. We get oxygen for free, we get sunlight for free, at least so far. Maybe it's going to change. But there is something about the way nature is made that nurtures us effortlessly for us. So the other aspect of the 12th house is that you can connect to the collective consciousness, where everybody has the same source, the same experience. All the trees, all the animals, including humans, originate from the same source. How does that match career? We can understand the spiritual connection. But the reason the 12th house is related to career is that it is the place where we can connect to the collective consciousness. And we can offer a service that people need. Remember that it's opposing the 6th house of work. So in the 6th house, you prepare your work. You do your charts, you buy your computer, you take care of all the logistics, all the maintenance. But in the 12th house is when someone knocks at your door and says, can I buy your shoes? Or can I buy your service? It's a house, again, just like I mentioned, where it's not in your control. Because you cannot control who is going to reach out to you to ask for a service, right? You open your shop, the door is open, but you're not pulling people in. They have to want to come in. So there, you just sit at your desk waiting for clients. So you did the Virgo work, you did the 6th house work to have everything ready and prices listed and good quality, whatever you do. But then if our client's going to come and show up, that's a 12th house dynamic. And if your service represents something that is in need, then you will get a lot of traffic. For example, you will see that most politicians, many have the sun or Saturn in the 12th house, because the sun has to do with leadership and Saturn has to do with governance and legislation and systems. So when it's in the 12th house, you can touch the public through governance, through laws. This is also true with aspects to Neptune and placements of Pisces. So I use the modern rulers. I consider the traditional rulers, of course, but I would see a correlation. You see Angela Merkel with Saturn Neptune conjunction. You see Joe Biden, with a very heavy 12th house. If Putin's chart is correct, then he's also a very heavy 12th house. George Bush had Sun Saturn in the 12th house. So all these politicians have some kind of strong Neptune or Saturn with the 12th house. So it's interesting to explore that perspective.
One of the reasons how I connected these two things together is that I tend to be looking at the 5th house as the self-employment, and the 12th house is the 8th from the 5th, which is, of course, something to do with other people's money. So that's one of the ways how I look at the 12th house, how we can connect it to vocational astrology, because if I use my creativity, 5th house, then I can actually make money, which brings in the 8th house. But another interesting thing,
That's
which I find
beautiful. It's very interesting to see, this different angle. It makes sense.
And the other idea I always had about the 12th house is because if I look at the 5th house as in kids, then the 1st house is the 9th from the 5th, which is obviously the end of the pregnancy. That's how we give birth. So the 12th house is something to do with the last 1 month of the pregnancy. But again, this is when the baby is kind of fully developed and gaining some type of consciousness. So from the psychological development point of view, I think the 12th house is extremely important to integrate. And this is the reason why I kind of believe that the last month of the pregnancy is very crucial, in a sense that, that's when you kind of soak up some, like you called it, cosmic womb, right? So yeah, this is how I kind of colorate. And I tend to be looking at also the 12th house as somehow conception, in a sense, because the 5th house is something to do with sexuality. The 8th house is something to do with sexuality. So the 8th from the 5th somehow is the integration of the sexual power. So how I kind of translated that for myself is that it's kind of like the birthplace of certain type of consciousness, some consciousness, ideas. And if we want to be kind of growing those dreams, as we call it nowadays, with the 12th house, then of course that's going to be the starting place. What do you think about the idea?
Well, I definitely see, the 1st house as the birth. It's the ignition, and related to the Aries principle. We move from the 12th house, which is passive. You're in the womb and you're just waiting, and you receive everything you need to receive. And then in the 1st house, you take charge of your destiny. You become self, individual. You separate from the mother, and you separate from everything else because you need to become your own. So yeah, I would definitely see the 12th house related to not just the cosmic womb on a spiritual level, but also very biologically, the pregnancy process. I didn't think necessarily the last month, but I'm hearing you and it makes sense. I agree also, all the fixed houses and fixed signs are related to sexuality. We tend to think that Aquarius is not so sexual, but there is a whole sexual paradigm involved in the fixed signs. They represent the creation forces. And so, yeah, I can relate that to the houses as well.
So do you look at the 12th house as the house of self-harm and kind of like the self-sabotaging at all?
Well, that's one option. What I like to do, and that's part of evolutionary astrology, is that you can have a lot of definitions, self-harm or self-undoing, or like we said, prisons, but what is the root cause? You want to get to the intention, because then you can help people. If you see someone who's harming themselves, you're not just going to tell them, well, it's in your 12th house. You're meant to do it. You want to give people a direction and understand that the chart reflects an intelligent development. We're not meant to suffer all the time. We're not meant to live in dysfunction. So the 12th house is not meant, but in its intention, to be a house of self-undoing. But where is the self-undoing coming from? First of all, when you lose control, you can be making wrong decisions. You're confused. So that's one aspect of it. You can feel, one of the experience of the people who have a lot of 12th house, they can feel overwhelmed. They can feel like they don't know who they are and how to protect themselves. And because I said it's a place where you're not in power, where you're not in control, it can be also an experience where you are overpowered by other people. For example, people who have Mars in the 12th. And that's true to Mars in Pisces as well. They can experience bullying at school, where, other kids are mistreating them and they feel without defense. So there's a feeling in the 12th house that I am not in charge and I am not in control, and therefore I'm very vulnerable. However, you will also see soldiers, very powerful people with a strong 12th house. Because if you use the 12th house for service, for something that is not just about yourself, then it becomes very supportive and powerful. So there is a risk of victimization in the 12th house, because it's a house where we don't feel physically protected. But this is also why it's a house of prayer. Because when you feel very small and very vulnerable, you want to connect with the Creator. And then you can get support from the universe.
So we can kind of call it as a house of manifestation, really?
What do you mean by manifestation?
Such as like the law of attraction?
I would say that's more of a 9th house, I would see. Because in the 12th house, if we speak about fate, it's more like it doesn't matter what you want. You will get what you need.
Yeah.
So if you want to manifest a house, maybe it's fate. It's not your projection. So quite often, this is why, let's say, for example, I wanted to be an artist and I study sound and I study, all kinds of things that focused on artistic expression. But the universe had other plans and I became an astrologer. That's a 12th house reality, is that it doesn't matter what you think. It doesn't matter what you want. What will happen is what needs to happen. And you're meeting a stronger force than yourself. So if you want to manifest something that is part of your, destiny, then it can happen through the 12th house, indeed.
One of the reasons why I love making these interviews, because obviously you might be having a different opinion. I have my own opinion. And then somehow when we collide them, obviously something great can happen. I tend to be looking at law of attraction from the 7th house, actually. And one of the reasons is because that's the other side. That's the unintegrated part of our psyche. Mm-hmm. So if I get in touch with that, then obviously the universe become one. But I get your 9th house interpretation. Of course, we need a tremendous amount of faith in order for us to create something. I'm wondering what your intake on the 12th house from the wild animal perspective, because what I kind of put together in my head was, if the 6th house is something to do with the pets, and obviously a pet is about loving and caring for them and so forth, 12th house could be about the wild animals, but then it can represent also our wild nature, kind of like the untamed personality. So do you agree with this statement?
Yeah, I do. Because again, if we look at the 12th house from the source and the greater forces of life, it does represent nature in its original form. So anything that is not touched by humans, even jungles, we often speak of the oceans, but anything that is untamed, wild, both vegetation and animals, big animals, is part of the 12th house. And of course, the 6th house is where we try to control and try to clean and try to fix and try to manage. It's a house of management. The only difference, and I know in traditional text, it's not mentioned that way, but what I have observed is that the 6th house is the old definition of pets. Because back in the days, husbandry, animals were, you didn't have your chihuahua in a bag. You had cows and pigs, and you had a dog wandering around. So there was no modern concept of connecting with your animals that way. So I see the 6th house more as functional animals, service animals, such as farm, the cows and the donkeys and even horses, or you will also see, service dogs that are used with the police, to smell drugs and things like that. So these are animals used for functional purposes. Whereas our pets is more of a Leo 5th house, similar to our children. And you will see quite often when someone, for example, has challenging aspect to their 5th house or to their son, that there's going to be something with the pet needing to go to the vet and get treatment. But yeah, I would agree with you that the 12th house represents the wild animals.
Probably one of the favorite meanings of the 12th house nowadays is something to do with addictions. So what do you think about how addictions can be represented by the 12th house?
Well, let's go back to that correlation between the 12th and the 1st. The cosmic womb and birth in the 1st. When you are in the cosmic womb, or even in your mother's womb, you're safe. You are fed. Everything is provided to you, and you are in this state, this passive state of being. You don't need to do anything. It's happening to you. In the 1st house, you are born. You need to get out. You need to make the effort, struggle, fight. Aries is the 1st sign. And it's true that life begins as a battle. You see the animal coming out of the eggshells. They need to run. They need to already do something to fight for their survival. What happens in the 12th house is that there is a resistance to being born. I don't want to be here in this place because there's so much suffering. There's so much struggle. I'm looking at that 1st house and it scares me because I'm going to have to fight. I'm going to have to, take care of my survival. When here, I'm in the hands of God. I'm protected. And there's that sense that actually the 12th house is the safest house, because if the universe has your back, nothing's going to happen to you.
Well, really.
So just finishing that thought, that's the reason why some people who have a strong 12th house can have this existential angst and this struggle to be in this dimension. And so there can be all kinds of escapes. You have the escape of denial. When you have people with 12th house that are Pollyanna, everything's great, everybody's happy, they beautify everything on purpose because they don't want to see the pain, they cannot handle it. Then you have the drugs and the alcohol, other types of escape. Then you have spiritual escape, which is called spiritual bypassing, where people, escape into the spiritual world where we speak about love and unconditional love and meditating all day, but it's not integrated, because when you speak to these people, they're not really happy and they're not really able to form relationships and their life is not really working. So that's also a spirituality as an escape. So you have all kinds of escape because of the difficulty being in this denser dimension, or in other words, leaving the womb is hard. And I want to go back to it.
I really love this explanation. I never thought of that, actually. Thank you. Nowadays I have seen so many questions about the secret enemy and the public enemy, meaning of the 7th or the 12th house, or it's the 6th house and the 12th house. So I'm just wondering what your intake on that. Because obviously this is also a traditional approach, right? 12th house is the secret enemies. You don't really know those people, or they do something dodgy behind your back. And the 7th house would be the open enemies, where they do it right in front of your face.
Yeah. I mean, the 7th house is so interesting to me because, like you say, I agree that it's not the integrated self. And so the 7th house represents something that is our polarity, that we're not really comfortable with. It's actually outside our comfort zone. And that's why we want other people to do that. You know, you're going to do that, and I'm going to marry you, or I'm going to be with you because I don't want to do it. So it's finding someone who can complement you. And at the same time, it's going to be someone who will confront you. You know, if you are a Republican, they're going to be the Democrat. If you're a right wing, they're going to be the left wing. If you are a scientist, they're going to be the religious people. So the 7th house always brings the duality, the opposite of your duality. And we learn that through our enemies and our marriages, interestingly.
Yeah.
And it's right that I would see that as, you know, something that's more in your face, that's more, you know, interactive with you. And the 12th house secret enemies, I mean, there is a part of that in the 12th house. But to me, it goes back to the feeling of not being prepared in the 12th house. You know, you are in that cosmic womb. You don't have your hand on your gun. You are in a very innocent, there's a lot of innocence in the 12th house. And so you trust because it's a place where you have to trust. You're not in control. You know, you have to trust that the sun will rise tomorrow, even if it's not up to you. You know, you're not in control of that. You have to trust that, you know, the temperature is going to be right for you. So you naturally trust many things. And what can happen in the 12th house is that you may extend your trust to a place where you become naive, where you don't see danger. You will see people with a strong 12th house who go from one extreme to another. They are either very innocent and gullible, and they, you know, they believe everything that's said to them, or they're paranoid and everybody's against them. Especially if Mars and Pluto is in the 12th, it can create this paranoia. And it's like the sky is going to fall on my head and something that I cannot control will affect me. A personal example, when I several years ago, I had transiting Mars going through my 12th house. And there was someone trying to get into my house, break in. When I heard some noise. And so it was a very vulnerable situation. You're sleeping, 12th house, and someone comes in the dark and tries to steal things from you while you're asleep. So it was a very, you know, a moment where there was a hidden enemy. You know, I couldn't see his face. And of course, I did wake up. But interestingly, you know, the adrenaline kicked in and I rushed out to confront him. and I scared him off. He ran away. So there was something about the Mars in the 12th also that unexpectedly, I found some kind of courage that I didn't even know I had. Like, if you would tell me now, what would you do if someone breaks in? I will tell you, I'm going to try to hide, or I'm going to try to run away. But something, took over me. So that was interesting astrology lesson in real time.
It's a very interesting example because something similar happened to me, but I got fraud. Basically, they stole my bank card and they stole quite a huge amount from it in Apple stores and stuff like that. And that happened when Mercury was in the 12th house, and Mercury rules tricksters. But what I really started doing with that Mercury, I started doing some investigation myself because the police wasn't really helpful. So I went collecting all invoices, paperwork in different type of shops and receipts so that I can present something to the police. And of course, that's Mercury related also. But if they asked me what I would do, probably I would say I would just let go and try to learn a spiritual meaning of why I had to lose such a huge amount of money overall. So my reaction would be very similar to yours, really. I'm just wondering if you work with planetary joys.
Mm-mm.
No. Okay. So I'm not going to ask you why do you think Saturn has got planetary joy in the 12th house, because it's very interesting, right? 12th house, which is the not so real, it's a cosmic force behind the scenes. And then we've got Saturn, which is an absolute rigid reality. So,
I mean, I have my explanation for it, but my perspective from an evolutionary point of view is that planets, wherever they are by sign or house, are not initially good or bad. Each has its quality and its shadow. Like, there's no placement that is without shadow, and there's no placement that is only shadow. I mean, we see Mars now at its exaltation degree, 27, 28 Capricorn, and it's nothing really so nice about it. The world is in raging. So when I personally try to move away from these classifications, because in my practice, for the way I use astrology, it doesn't serve me, but I understand that can serve other techniques, horary or some predictive methods. So there's a place for that in other types of uses. But I think, I have Saturn right on the cusp of the 12th. So it's personal experience. And it's a mixed bag. I think that the positive, the joy of Saturn in the 12th is that the higher frequency of Saturn reminds you that there is a higher order. Mm-hmm. And that it's part of this experience of fate and karma, that there is a universal justice, and that this universe is not random. So Saturn in the 12th makes us understand there is a order in the chaos, and that there is an intention, that things are not just happening at a whim. And of course, we can even see on a deeper spiritual level that any kind of, spiritual aspiration will take you to a Saturn figure. There is a creative force larger than you. So, I don't think it even matters what spiritual path you're on, whether you are a Buddhist, or Judeo-Christian, Muslim, or other traditions, even if you are a pagan, there is a connection to a universal order. And I think that's why Saturn has a very important place in the 12th house. But the mixed bag is that what I often see with Saturn in the 12th house is that you can find order in the universe, but you don't find order in the material world. So some people with Saturn in the 12th house don't have role models. Parents were weak or not present. They didn't look up to them. And so, unless you have a spiritual path, it can feel like there's no direction in your life. So you will see also sometimes people with Saturn in the 12th who end up making bad choices in their lives, even addictions and things like that. And then they have a spiritual awakening and they become very rigid in that spiritual awakening and practice, because they finally have some order and they become too attached to it. So, they're going to be radical vegan or, super devoted to some kind of practice, because it finally gives them a sense of boundaries and order.
One of the reasons why I like Saturn in the 12th house is because it might be giving us the ability to kind of give a form to the formless. Or the other reason is because Saturn in the 12th might help us to kind of test spirituality. So I found plenty of people being interested in spirituality, but they are also questioning it. So they want to do research about it. They're testing it, whether it works or not. So probably that's, for me, the positive manifestation of Saturn.
And I think that matches, because finding structure in the infinite is part of understanding there is an order.
Yeah.
It ties into these concepts.
Maybe the last meaning of the 12th house, and I'm wondering on your intake on that, because from a traditional perspective, 12th house would rule the nightmares, and the 9th house would be the nice dreams. So can we actually differentiate these two, or you completely disagree with that?
I agree it has to do with dreams, because the 12th house has to do with the unconscious. And so it's a place, again, we go back to being in a passive, when you're asleep, which is 1/3 of your life, you are in a state of complete surrender. So I would not make that distinction between good dreams and bad dreams, because I have experienced, through client, amazing revelations through dreams with 12th house work. So yeah, what I disagree with is all the bad stuff in the 12th and all the good stuff with Jupiter. I think that's a little too simplistic.
Yeah, it is. I researched Bonati's work on dreams, but from a horary perspective. And Bonatti says that the 9th house ruler being in certain houses indicates predictive dreams, and certain houses would indicate unconscious fears, subconscious fears, and just a trick of the mind, basically. And he wrote down how he used it for predictions. And then I started using it with clients, and it worked extremely well. So that's why this kind of statement made me wonder why the Asian people differentiated the bad dreams and the good dreams, and given the 12th house, the bad dreams type of meaning. But of course, since the world has, developed and quite a lot, so we cannot stick to all these old rules so rigidly, I guess.
Yeah, I think there may be nuances, and I would agree perhaps, maybe the 11th house can also be predictive dreams. You have many channel, Uranus in the 12th. I've seen people who can channel really incredible things that are not of this world. And so there is I would explore the fact that different houses, different planets will give a different type of dreams. But my tendency is to stay more neutral, whether it's good or bad. I will say, in a worst case scenario, a 12th house can also mean psychic invasion, where you're not protecting yourself spiritually and you end up with spiritual parasites. So, hearing voices and feeling fragmented and you don't know why. So yeah, it's definitely one of the most challenging house to understand, but also to integrate, because it's the only house that take you beyond time. All the other houses from 1 to 11, you have solid references. You know what it's about, what you want to do, where you're going. And so you face problem, you know how to fix it. When you move into the 12th house, it's another dimension. And if you're not equipped, it can be disorienting. It can feel like you don't have time, you don't have ground, you don't have the material world that you're used to. But that is the magic of the 12th house, is that it takes you to something that is beyond time. And we can welcome that sometimes.
There is a timing technique I studied ages ago in Hungary called heptades. And the heptade actually works backwards. So the first 7 years of our life is represented by the 12th house in there, which kind of makes sense because obviously that's when we are very reliant on our mother and on our parents. And this is
absolutely
developing some type of addictions and all those type of things. So, and that's why one of the biggest meaning for me, for people having so much energy going on in the 12th house, is that, that's if they don't develop their psychic abilities, or they don't want to be healing, because of course 12th house is hospitals and something to do with the healing as well, then of course this is when certain type of problems might be occurring in people's life.
I agree. And we look at, there are two directions in the zodiac. There's the clockwise and the counterclockwise. You have the nodes moving counterclockwise. You have the daily motion because the houses move faster. So all the planets during the day, they move 12, 11, 10, and so forth. But on the other hand, the secondary motion is moving from Aries to Taurus to Libra. So there is, I agree with you totally that there is a simultaneous, 2 cycles at least operating at the same time clockwise and counterclockwise through the signs. And it makes perfect sense that, you know, like you would associate that with psychological development.
The very last question I would have for you is because, you know, at the end of the day, this is a very difficult placement to have. And nowadays, one of the most fashionable questions in astrology is, what are the remedies? So what would you recommend to people with a quite strong 12th house?
First of all, I want to add another layer to this, is that it's the most difficult in our culture. Because if you go back to ancient time, where people were more in tune with nature and more in tune with natural cycles, the 12th house was not difficult. Mm-hmm. In our culture, where we need security all the time and where we need to be in control all the time, you know, we don't learn about the 12th house in our schools. So it is, you know, a house that ends up so mismanaged because our culture is not a 12th house culture. But then what other remedies? One of the things when I see someone with a strong 12th house, what I understand is that they need to devote their lives to something larger than themselves. That this life is not going to be about, you know, if they want to wear a blue tie or a red suit, it's not about the details, and it's not about the personal nuances. It's a house that is more global. And so many people with a strong 12th house will do well in larger communities where they are part of a larger dynamic. Now, this actually works as well with the traditional idea that the 12th house is about isolation. My take is that the 12th house is the most public of houses because it's the house where you join the collective. You're everything, you're everyone. So many people who have a strong 12th house will have public service position. But because they don't have a thick skin, because they don't always know how to protect themselves, there's a feeling of being overloaded. Too much stimulation, too many people, and then you need to hide in your cave to, you know, reset your system. So people with a strong 12th house go through these phases of complete exposure, complete service, involvement, and then the need to catch up and regroup. So I don't think it has to be, like I say, our culture is more of an individualistic culture. And the 12th house is more communal. So if they're learning these things, it can be used as a remedy. And of course, you know, any kind of spiritual development. What do I mean by spiritual development? It's about asking those questions. Why am I here? What is this all about? You know, why am I waking up every morning? If you are open to ask those questions, then the 12th house is going to give you those answers.
Some of the practical advice I usually give to people about 12th house placement is that, you know what, just practice some random kindness, because this is a charitable house. Knowing that if you give something to the universe will give it back to you, in a sense. Or I usually tell them to have a dream journal, write down your dreams and then try to find some collaborations between them, because there is probably a hidden message behind. Or just meditate a little bit, connect with your higher self, kind of like try to kind of get back into the galactic center to download new information, which is going to kind of recharge your soul. And yes, probably these people need downtime. So therefore, I usually say that every 3 months, take holiday, at least few days, because probably it's kind of like a cross on the soul to work 24/7 non-stop, and you burn out kind of. Mm-hmm. So these are, and then maybe just attend a spiritual retreat, for instance. I have 12 house interests. I have got my sun there, and I need a few hours a day when I close down the laptop, switch off the phone, and then I just, this tingly-tangly kind of state where I can be running around naked at home, and then I don't need to worry about, whatever is going on my laptop. And that helped me a lot to kind of ground myself a little bit. Why did you become interested in 12th house? Do you have plenty of placement there?
It happened in a very 12th house way that I did not plan. What happened is, when this whole thing kind of started in the year 2000, and I was just preparing to write a workshop about the 12th house. And usually I don't write notes. I am more of a spontaneous speaker. But for some reason, I said, let's just write some notes. And I started to write and write and write, and it didn't stop. So many, many, many ideas started to flow. And this was a time of Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, the year 2000, in my 12th house.
So you've got a Gemini rising?
It's Cancer rising.
Cancer rising, okay.
So Jupiter moved into the 12th, Saturn later moved into the 12th, and the time that Jupiter hit the 12th house was just a continual download. And I didn't understand those ideas at first, but gradually I worked on it. And so that's how it happened, really. So I did not have any specific intention. It's something that unfolded through these circumstances. But I do have my moon there, natally. And like I said, Saturn natally is also on the cusp, like 1 degree from the 12th house.
Wow.
If you use whole signs, then it is in the 12th.
Yeah, well, what I learned back in the days is that any planet 3 or 5 degrees, depending on the house type, belongs to the next one. So maybe that Saturn is already in the 12th somehow. Well, thank you very much for joining me. I think it was a pleasure, and you really summarized well what 12th house means. And it's not just about bad and good, and it's not just about suffer, but probably there is a little bit of a meaning that instead of suffering, we need to be in service to others, or at least serve the universe somehow, a larger picture.
Yeah. What I think everywhere, whatever type, whatever aspect of astrology you're analyzing, I think the bottom line is that before we look at the outcome, what's going to happen? Are you going to get married? Are you going to be victimized? Are you going to get rich? It's about understanding what the intention is first. once you get the intention, then you can see, oh, it could go this way, the shadow or the gains. Astrology is just energy, right? We are trying to box it into our little categories of good and bad and pleasure and pain. But at the end of the day, it's all part of nature.
Yeah. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
All the best to you. Thank you for your service.
Oh, thank you. My son hopefully did just the right thing. Do you have upcoming lectures or courses? If someone...
Well, I would like to maybe inspire people, just a moment, to look into the book if they are interested in this material. Here is, oops, sorry, it takes so long. 12 house stuff. So here it is. Can I share a screen?
Sure. Let me just give you permission.
It's on the green arrow usually.
Oh yeah, I know it's somewhere here. Well, I'll just make you a host and then you should be able to share the screen. Yes, so it should be disabled.
So yeah, if people are interested in this material, that's what came out of this. And yeah, you can check my website.
Very 12 house picture, surely.
Well, yeah. If people are interested in this line of work, just look at my website. There are many free videos and articles, and enjoy yourself.
Thank you very much. I will post your link in the description box so people can find you. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I hope this helped you to maybe integrate your 12th house a little bit in a better way. And bless it be. See you soon with another video. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.